My name is Linda. I'm 62 years old, freshly divorced, and for the first time in 3 decades, I have nowhere to go. After my husband left me for a woman half his age and a legal settlement that felt more like a punishment than a resolution, I packed a small overnight bag and drove to the only place I thought I'd find comfort, my son's house. I hadn't seen Michael in 3 months, not since the divorce proceedings started getting ugly. I told myself it was because he had his own life, 2 kids, and a demanding job. I convinced myself he'd be there when it really mattered. That night, standing in the driveway, with my heart racing and the porch light spilling over my shoes, I finally realized I was wrong. When he opened the door, the look in his eyes hit harder than the final divorce decree. No warmth, no hug, just cold detachment, like I was a solicitor interrupting his dinner. He didn't even pretend to smile. Behind him, Ashley appeared, perfectly made up, wearing the kind of clothes that said she never did her own grocery shopping. Her smile was tight and polite, the kind people give when they're hiding something they're proud of. I forced a smile, held my bag a little tighter, and said I just needed a few days. I told them my new apartment wouldn't be ready until next week, and I had nowhere else to stay. I kept it simple, humble. I didn't want to make it a big deal. But before I could even finish explaining, Ashley stepped forward and said it was actually perfect timing. Her voice was syrupy and rehearsed. The way you talk to someone you're about to get rid of. They led me into the living room, and immediately I noticed how much the house had changed. All the framed photos I'd helped them hang were gone. In their place were cold, abstract paintings that didn't mean anything. The cozy couch where I used to read to my grandchildren had been replaced by something hard and white and soulless. Everything felt unfamiliar, like I'd stepped into a museum exhibit called The Life You No Longer Belong To. Ashley motioned for me to sit, not on the couch, but on a single chair placed across from the like I was being interviewed for a job I didn't apply for. Michael sat beside her, arms folded, eyes blank. I could tell something was coming, something that was going to hurt. I asked where the kids were, thinking maybe their presence would soften whatever this was. But Ashley said they were with her mother for the night. She added that it was better this way. Less confusion, fewer witnesses. Then Michael looked at me and said they'd been meaning to have this talk for a while. That now was as good a time as any. Ashley folded her hands, like she was about to deliver a sales pitch. They told me, very plainly, that my divorce was a relief, that they'd been waiting for it. Then they could finally move forward with their lives. I sat there frozen, trying to process what I was hearing. They weren't upset about what had happened to me. They were celebrating it. Michael said the company was finally in the right hands. Ashley smiled like she'd won something. And then she said something I'll never forget. She said, "Thank God he left you. Now pack your things and get out of our lives." My own son, the boy I raised by myself while working 2 jobs. The boy I fed before I fed myself. The boy who used to cry when I left for night shifts. He sat there beside his wife and said nothing as she dismantled me, piece by piece. When I asked where I was supposed to go, he looked away and said, "That's not our problem anymore." I walked out with my bag, my pride shredded, my hands shaking. I didn't cry until I got back in the car. I didn't scream until I hit the highway. But in that moment, walking away from the house that once felt like home, I knew something was broken that might never be fixed. Ashley was the one who broke the silence first. She leaned forward, resting her perfectly manicured hands on her knees, her voice calm and precise, like she was explaining a recipe. She said they'd been talking for a long time about what to do once I was finally out of the picture. I blinked, unsure if I heard her right. Michael just sat there beside her, staring past me like I was part of the furniture. When I asked what she meant, she smiled and said they were relieved that John and I had split, because now they could finally move forward. The company, she said, could finally be theirs. It took me a moment to register that she wasn't just being cruel. She was telling me something calculated, deliberate. Michael added that they'd always known I'd never step aside willingly, that I was too attached, too sentimental to see the company clearly. That's when it hit me. They hadn't just been waiting for my marriage to fall apart. They'd helped it happen. Ashley didn't flinch. She said she was the one who encouraged John to hire his assistant. The one who told him he needed someone younger, someone with energy. She even admitted to suggesting the late-night meetings, the business trips, the quiet rumors. Every piece of the puzzle fit, and it made me sick. I looked at Michael. I was hoping for a crack in his expression. Some sign that this was going too far, that maybe he hadn't been part of it. But all I saw was resolve. He said, it wasn't personal. It was business. He said the company needed to be in stronger hands, in younger hands, in his hands. And I was just in the way. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask him how he could forget everything I'd done for him, how he could sit there and talk about me like I was a hurdle to climb over. But my voice wouldn't come. All I could do was sit there while they explained how they'd nudged John toward the affair, how they'd manipulated the narrative so I would be the last to know. Ashley said they didn't expect me to come here tonight, that I just complicated things. Michael shrugged and said, it didn't matter. The papers were signed. John had already handed over his shares to Michael as part of the settlement. They had everything they needed now. They didn't need me. The room felt smaller with every word. The walls, the furniture, even the air felt hostile. Like the house itself had turned against me. When I asked if I could at least stay a night or two, regroup before moving on, Ashley gave me that same tight smile and said it wasn't a good idea. They were trying to build a new image, and I didn't really fit in. I turned to Michael, pleading silently for him to stop this, to remember who I was to him. But he just looked away. Said they had guests coming this weekend. Said it would be awkward. Said I needed to figure out my next steps somewhere else. That was when I realized it. They had been waiting for this moment, planning for it, not just for weeks or months, but for years. Every polite conversation, every family dinner, every hug had been a mask. And now that the mask was off, there was nothing left underneath but ambition and greed. I stood up slowly, afraid my legs might give out. My bag felt heavier than it had when I arrived. Ashley walked me to the door like a hotel concierge, smiling the whole time. Michael didn't follow. He stayed on the couch, flipping through his phone like we were already done. As I stepped outside into the cold night air, I realized the person I had loved most in the world had become a stranger. And the worst part wasn't losing the company, I was losing my son. The Sunset Inn was the kind of place people stayed when they had no better options. My room smelled faintly of bleach and cigarette smoke, and the mattress dipped in the center like it had given up long before I ever lay down. I dropped my bag by the door and just stood there, staring at the outdated wallpaper and buzzing overhead light, wondering how everything in my life had collapsed so quickly. I'd spent 30 years building a family, building a life, and now I had nothing but a $28 room and a plastic keycard. I didn't even have the energy to cry. I just sat on the edge of the bed, my hands folded in my lap, trying to breathe through the weight in my chest. 3 hours ago, I thought I had a family. I thought I had a home. Now, even the silence felt like it was laughing at me. I opened my phone to check for messages, even though I knew there would be none. The screen lit up with a new text, just as I was about to set it down. It was from Paula, one of the accounting managers who had worked with me and John for over a decade. She asked if I had a moment to talk. Said it was urgent. My fingers shook as I dialed, not because I feared what she would say, but because it was the first time all day someone had remembered I existed. Her voice was tight, anxious. She told me Michael had come into the office that morning with legal papers claiming full control of the company. He'd already fired 3 people and approved massive expenditures, new furniture, new executive suites, a branding consultant. It wasn't just reckless. It was dangerous. I sat up straighter, heart pounding. Paula said she didn't know who else to call, that she trusted me, that she was scared the company was about to implode. I felt something shift inside me then, not anger, not sadness. Focus. He might have taken my house. He might have taken my marriage. But he had no idea how much I knew. And if he thought I would just disappear, he didn't know me at all. That night, in a rundown motel room with stained carpet and flickering lights, I found the first spark of something I hadn't felt in weeks. A reason to fight. The next morning, I sat across from Marcus, John's longtime attorney, in a quiet corner of the bank's conference room. He looked at me with something between relief and hesitation before sliding a folder across the table. Inside were documents I'd never seen, but apparently had always belonged to me. As I skimmed the first few pages, I felt my pulse climb. Morrison Industries, the company Michael thought he had inherited, was just a subsidiary. The real power, the parent company, the assets, the contracts was held under Morrison Holdings. And Morrison Holdings was in my name, mine alone. Signed, sealed, and legally protected years before the divorce. I looked up, stunned. Marcus explained that John had created the structure after a nasty divorce in his early years, determined never to let a courtroom decide his future again. But more than that, he'd wanted to protect me. He believed I was the heart of the business, the one who built the relationships, the one who saw people, not just profit. I sank back in my chair, breathless. Everything Michael thought he had control over, he didn't. He had taken a shell, an operating license, but not the land it stood on, not the contracts that kept it alive, not the soul of the company. All of it had been entrusted to me. For the first time in days, the grief gave way to clarity. The woman they'd tossed out like she was nothing held the keys to everything. They had no idea. But they were about to find out. After I left the bank, I didn't drive straight back to the motel. I parked outside a quiet cafe with free Wi-Fi, opened my laptop, and began pulling every document I'd saved over the years. Financials, contracts, board minutes, client correspondence. Everything John and I had built together. I'd always kept digital backups, even when no one asked me to. Old habits from years of being the only one who ever had to double-check the numbers. The more I read, the clearer the path became. Every major contract was with Morrison Holdings. Every piece of real estate was leased through it. Every department at Morrison Industries operated because I allowed it to. I'd been sitting on a power structure that looked invisible until someone tried to take it away. By the time the sun set, I had everything I needed. Names of vendors, contact details for legacy clients, a list of employees who would still take my call. Michael and Ashley had walked into a game they thought they'd already won, but they didn't even understand the rules. They were throwing around budgets and buzzwords, not realizing their entire foundation stood on ground I owned. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't heartbroken. I was focused. They wanted to erase me. They wanted to rewrite history and cast themselves as the new empire. But I had the receipts, the relationships, and now the leverage. They thought I'd disappeared. What they didn't know was I'd just begun to play. I walked into the front lobby of Morrison Industries like I'd done 100 times before. Only this time, no one smiled. The receptionist, a girl I didn't recognize, looked up with confusion and asked if I had an appointment. I didn't answer. I just told her to let Michael know his mother was here to see him. She blinked, then picked up the phone with a trembling hand. Patricia appeared before the call. Even though it wasn't connected, her eyes widened the second she saw me, then filled with something close to relief. She pulled me aside and whispered that things had gotten worse. More people fired. More money wasted. More reckless decisions are piling up like debris in a storm. I asked her to prepare termination letters for every subcontract Morrison Holdings had with Morrison Industries, effective immediately. Her eyebrows shot up, but she didn't question me. She just nodded and disappeared down the hallway, like she already knew this day would come. When I stepped into Michael's office, he was mid-conversation with two men in suits. Investors, probably. Pitching them dreams built on someone else's foundation. He froze when he saw me. One of the men asked if I was the office manager. I smiled and said no. I'm the owner. Then I looked Michael dead in the eye and told him we needed to talk. Alone. The room emptied fast. I closed the door behind them and laid the documents on the desk between us. termination of all active contracts, repossession of leased assets, revocation of shared client rights. His face drained of color as he scanned each page, his hand trembling slightly. He tried to argue, asking how I could do this. I stayed calm. You don't own what you think you own. This entire time, you've been running a business that survives only because I allow it. And now, I no longer do. He stood up, fists clenched, but the power was gone from his voice. I didn't need to yell, the papers did it for me. He finally understood the truth. He had never been in control, not for a single day. Ashley showed up 20 minutes later, heels clicking fast down the hallway. I was sitting calmly in the conference room with a copy of the contract in front of me. Her eyes darted from the paper to my face, then back again, like she was trying to piece together a puzzle she never imagined existed. Michael stood in the corner, pacing, running his hands through his hair. His voice had lost that smug edge. Now it was tight, panicked. He kept asking if this was legal, if it could be undone. I let them go on for a minute before sliding the original incorporation papers across the table. My name, my control, all signed, years ago. Ashley picked up the document with shaking hands. Her face drained as she read each line. She turned to Michael, demanding to know if he knew about this. He didn't answer. He couldn't. For the first time since that night at their house, they were the ones speechless. The ones backed into a corner. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked them both in the eye and said the contracts were done, effective immediately. Their access to company funds would be frozen, their authority revoked. And if they made so much as one legal misstep, I would press charges. They started arguing among themselves, fast and low. But I was already on my feet, gathering my things. Let them panic. Let them claw at the illusion they built. I didn't need to humiliate them. The truth had done that for me. And as I walked out of the room, I didn't look back. They weren't worth it. 3 days passed before I heard a knock at the door. It was late. I was sitting by the window in my new apartment, still unpacking, still figuring out what this new life would look like. When I opened the door and saw Michael standing there, alone, I didn't say a word. I just stepped aside and let him in. He looked smaller somehow. Not physically, but in the way a person does when they've been carrying shame. His voice was low when he spoke. No excuses, no spin. He said he'd messed up, that he'd let greed and pride take over, that he had let Ashley steer the wheel because it was easier than admitting he was scared of failing. I didn't interrupt. I let him talk. He told me he missed the version of himself who used to believe in hard work, that he missed the way I used to run the business, not just for profit, but for people. And then he said something I hadn't expected. He asked for a second chance. Not as an owner, not as a leader, just as a man who needed to rebuild. I looked at him for a long time. He was still my son. But the boy I raised had disappeared for a while, buried under entitlement and ambition. I told him I wasn't ready to forgive him. Not yet. But I was willing to see what he'd do if given a real shot. So I offered him a job. Entry-level, warehouse logistics, early shifts, manual labor, the kind of work that built the company in the first place. He blinked, surprised, maybe even offended, but then he nodded, said thank you, said he'd earn it this time. As he walked out, I didn't know if it would last, but for the first time in a long time, I saw something real in his eyes. Not regret, not fear, something quieter. Hope. Rebuilding the company wasn't about revenge. It was about purpose. I didn't want to just fix what had been broken. I wanted to build something better, something stronger. I reached out to the people who had stayed loyal through the chaos. People like Paula, who had spoken up when it would have been easier to stay quiet. We cleaned house, not out of anger, but out of respect for what the company was supposed to be. We brought in new hires, not based on resumes, but on heart. People who believed in the work, who treated others with dignity, who didn't care about titles, only teamwork. I took meetings in person. I walked the floors. I listened. It didn't matter that I was in my 60s, that people had expected me to fade quietly into the background. I wasn't done. In fact, I was just beginning. And for every woman who had been told she was too old, too emotional, or too soft, I wanted to be proof that life could start over, even after the worst kinds of endings. We built new systems. We restructured deals with values at the core. And the company started to thrive again. Not just in numbers, but in culture, in energy, in spirit. What we were building wasn't just a business, it was a legacy that finally felt like mine. Michael didn't complain once about the work. He showed up early, stayed late, and never asked for special treatment. I watched from a distance as he sorted inventory, loaded trucks, and followed instructions from managers who had no idea he once sat behind the corner office desk. At first, I waited for him to quit, to call it beneath him. But he didn't. He kept showing up, day after day. There was a humility in his posture I'd never seen before, a quietness that wasn't shame, but reflection. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just trying to do the work. We didn't talk much in those first few weeks, but sometimes I'd catch him looking at me across the warehouse, like he wanted to say something but knew it wasn't time yet. I didn't rush it. Some wounds need silence to heal, and some trust has to be rebuilt, one small moment at a time. One afternoon, he brought me a coffee, just set it on my desk without saying anything, and walked away. I let it sit there for an hour before I took a sip. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but it was something close. People always say revenge feels good. Maybe it does, for a minute. But what I've learned is that watching someone change for the better, watching them choose to be different, when no one's forcing them to, that feels deeper. That feels like hope. And for now, that's enough.